have a great time, but I think you're going to have a great time. So let me interrupt. First of all, I need to really say I have the fortune of having an amazing team at the Hispano Chamber. I mean, we're doing this in the middle of putting together a huge gala, and everybody just kind of rolled through punches, and here we are. So members of my team, would you all please stand up? And then members of my board, we have several members of the board here. Please stand up. You recognize them. Hey, we even have some former chairs here, Steve and Michelle. Please stand up. I know they might be some other. Okay, so anyway. It's all good, and that's the first thing Sol Trujillo said to me this morning is voting. So we love that. He's back in New Mexico. And the other thing he said is, well, I said, isn't it kind of funny we're going to be talking about Hispanics and Latinos? We're the white group, so it's kind of funny. But he's laughing. He said, well, that's not as funny as the fact that where's the red and the green chili here? I came for red and green chili, so we'll get to that later on. So, anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to have a fireside chat. This report is what's put out by Sol Trujillo's group. I'm going to call each of the folks that are up here. As we want to have dialogue with folks here, but we also know there's going to be time for Q&A, and there's also going to be a time afterwards to talk to Sol or anybody else afterwards. So we have two city councilors here, Claudia and Pena. Thank you for being here. Anyway, yeah, let's do that. I think I'm going to call up first Sol Trujillo, and everybody I think knows who he might be. We have this QR code to get this report, not this particular one, but the report that has all the information, the data. And so Sol, as I mentioned, is an amazing guy, and we're just so fortunate he's here, and he's going to stay for the gala tomorrow night. The reason that Zorro is our theme is because of Sol's conference latitude. Wilmer Valderrama was being interviewed, Fireside Chat, and he said, you know what, the Hispanics don't really have a superhero, you know, and others do, you know, the Black Community, Black Panther, and all that. So guess what? Zorro is being executive produced. He's going to start it, Wilmer Valderrama. So we thought, why not do that? And, you know, nobody thought it was a good idea because it sold out 2 weeks earlier. So anyway, so I'm really we have Phil Casals here, who's the president and CEO of Bricon. He's coming up here as well. He's my boss, so, you know, treat him really nice. Okay, Angela De Serrano from New Mexico Gas. Development, and then Joe Trimble, who is a vice president of many things throughout this last year. So we're going to kind of start this off by just letting Sol kind of talk a little bit about how you came to do what you're doing with latitude and all that good stuff. I think you have a microphone, so we're all good. I think we can sit down.
I do.
So let's do that. Let's start out that way.
Is it on? Is it on?
Good sound.
Can you hear me?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies. Well, I think in answer, Ernie, to your question, I'm a product with roots in this very famous state, very important state of Nuevo Mexico. My family, my mother's side goes back to the 1520s. My father's side goes back to the 1540s. In this area of around Las Vegas, Mora, Ledú, which are the big cities of New Mexico. The number of people that I meet around the country that say they're from that part of the state, I'm always amazed, because if they all would have stayed there, the state would be much, much bigger. But I'm a very proud Latino, who happens to also be a very proud American in terms of my country. And I think about our country called the United States of America as something that I take a lot of pride, a lot of ownership in, because my roots have always been here. My roots are actually 100 years before the Mayflower hit the northeastern side of the country. My roots are here under the name of the United States of New London. Oh, no, not New London, no. Oh, the United States of New Amsterdam. No. This is the United States of America. It was named after Amerigo Vespucci, who was Italian, but he was only involved here because of the Spaniards who employed him in terms of, the role that he played in the history of exploration and all the things that he was involved in. So I grew up a proud New Mexican. My parents got married at 16 or 14. They were kids. And it was after World War II where they moved to a place called Cheyenne, Wyoming. Because there wasn't enough work here, you needed a job. Union Pacific was building out a railroad. There were a lot of New Mexicans that moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming for work. And so I grew up there, but in our family, we never lost, even though we were surrounded by a state where essentially in the last election, 82% of the voters there voted for a guy named Donald Trump. So it says something about the nature of the state, but we never lost our roots. We never lost the pride in terms of being Latinos here in the US. And so as I went through my career, and I won't give you my bio, but I became the first native-born Latino of the Fortune 150 company. And it was called US West, which was the telephone company, as we used to call them at the time. And I know what I went through to get to that point. There were no doors open. I had to knock it open. I had to perform at levels in a big corporate world that I was had to be 10x better, not twice as good, but 10x better. But I took it as something that was a challenge for me, because I love to compete. And competing is kind of the evidence of people that you'll find in whatever sector of the economy that they're successful in is. They like competing. Otherwise, they wouldn't get to where they are. And in my case, I wanted to compete. And anything that I do, I like to be competitive in terms of all of that. Long story short, I became CEO of US West. We sold it. I became the CEO of Orange over in London. It was a FTSE listed company. Later on, we moved the listing over to France, into the CAC. They had to pass a law in France so that I could be the CEO there. Because they never had a non-French CEO. And at that time, we were the second largest company on the French list, the equivalent of the New York Stock Exchange, which was called the CAC. So there were all these things along the way that were different. And it was that you had to push the limits, you had to change the rules, you had to do all of those things. Then I went down to Australia after I sold the company called Orange, or Orange as they would say in Paris. I was recruited down to Australia to run what would be the equivalent of AT&T here in the US. And from there, we operated in Hong Kong and China and other parts of the world. So in terms of my portfolio of my career, every place that I went to, my angle, what I call my wide angle lens, got wider and wider because we all grew up in a very narrow context. If you've never lived anywhere but where you were born, if you've never left the state, if you've never left the country, if you've never left into outer space, your context keeps on expanding. And so I've had the good fortune of growing up as a proud Latino because my parents were puro, New Mexicans, right? And you can always tell a New Mexican if you're in New York or Florida or wherever because they have that sense of pride and roots. So I have it. So ultimately, to your question, as I traveled through my career has always been about, getting the best results and all that sort of thing, but also opening doors for others along the way, and trying to create the prototype of how people should think about Latinos as competitive, as doers, as high productivity, as innovators, as a lot of things. But while I was in Australia, and I had signed a contract that said I would only be there 3 years, they asked me to stay on for a 4th year until we found my successor. While I was watching TV, always watching TV, our news back home, there was an event happening in the state of Arizona where the first time in the history of our country, a law was passed that allowed for racial profiling, specifically around Latinos. And there was a famous sheriff in Arizona called Sheriff Joe. And he was the prototype of an anti-Latino sheriff. But this had to be passed by a legislature, a state legislature. And I was looking at that and saying, that's wrong. And about that same time, there was an election coming. And there were a lot of people, Republican candidates, that were talking about walls and building walls. And the most famous one was Donald Trump. But there was a guy named Herman Cain, who has since passed, but he was an African-American guy. And he talked about his solution for a wall was to build an electric fence so that if anybody touched that fence, it would die. Now, I grew up, I'm a baby boomer, but I grew up in an era where I was watching a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan, who also was a Republican. And Ronald Reagan, he opened up the world, essentially, with a lot that he did, but also starting with telling a Russian Soviet Union president to take down a wall so that you can open the gates for people to move, to grow, for an economy to thrive, etc. So while I was in Australia and I was watching all that, I said, this is my country. And when I come back, I can't let that just happen without a countervailing force of how you do that. Now, you're one person. I do have a big ego, but I'm also a pragmatic person that said, we have to create a notion of what is the value proposition around Latinos. Because these people that want to build walls, the people that want to deport, the people that don't think highly of Latinos and Latinas, they have a perception. And in marketing, perceptions are what they are, whether you like it or not. So you have to deal with it. And you have to counter it if it's wrong. And how do you counter perceptions? You bring facts and data to the fore, right? But first of all, you have to gather it. And so when I came back, I called up a friend, his name is Henry Cisneros, who was a Democrat. I'm a Republican. And I said, Henry, I've been out of the country for about 8 years. ¿Qué pasó? I said, we've had a reversal about Latinos and Latinas. And we gathered other people, Federico Peña and some other people from around the country, and said, this isn't right, and whether you're Cuban, whether you're Puerto Rican, whether you're Mexican, whatever you claim as your roots, it's not right. And everybody, the way I like to explain it to everybody, is if you're a Garcia in Miami, or a Garcia in New York or New Jersey, or a Garcia in Chicago, or a Garcia in Los Angeles, or Garcia in San Antonio, guess what? You're all Mexicans. And that's the perception that people have, whether we like it or not. And everybody likes to say, well, we Cubans are different than the Mexicans and all that. My conversation with them is, what's different? I'll tell you what's different. And I say this very publicly. The difference is, and I think the biggest argument is, do you eat black beans or brown beans? Y sabes por qué? Right? And the reason why is because you sitting there as a business professional, or you sitting there as a business professional, but you're from New Mexico and you're from Miami, your aspirations are the same. You want personal success. You want success for your family. And you want success for your community. And you want success for your country. So what's the major difference between all of us? The answer is black beans or brown beans, right? And so making the point that says, let's get past all this other stuff, including Republican or Democrat, which then led me, and this is the last thing I want to say, sorry for going so long, but I want everybody to understand my motivation. My motivation right now, for the rest of my life, is I want to see my country still retain its prominence as the #1 economy in the world. I want the Latino community to be known as the weapon to be able to do that. And that's simply because the Anglo-American cohort is in decline by virtue of birth rates, by virtue of a lot of things. So it's not an anti-Anglo thing. It's just the math. And I don't think about it as a complex algorithm out of Stanford Research Institute. It's second grade math. 400,000 people are turning 65 every month. And 80% of those people are Anglo-Americans. The African-American community is slightly growing, but not very much. And they're about half the size of the Latino cohort. And then the Asian American community is growing, but they're very small. So the impact on the total economy can't be that great, but they are a growth part of our economy. So what I like to do, having run big companies around the world and competing against the biggest brands in the world, is I draw up my own Pareto chart. And the Pareto chart is always about, if you want to grow, where are you going to get the growth from? And then do you allocate resources to where the growth is? That's simple. And I've competed against the biggest brands, and I've beaten them all, whatever part of the world, with the simple formula. And so as a nation today, I'm spending a lot of my time, not all my time, but a lot of my time, having created the Latino Donor Collaborative, where we're gathering all this data, so that I want every Latino and every non-Latino in this country to know that the US Latino cohort is the equivalent of the 5th largest economy in the world, bigger than France, bigger than the UK, bigger than India now. That's how big we are. Then secondly, it is growing faster than any other cohort. And that's simply because, and when I say that, the Asian American cohort is growing faster by a little bit, but they're not as big. So the impact on the economy, I need to say that. Because I'm not trying to put down any other cohort, it's just the math. And as a business person or a politician, everybody should understand basic math, right? Because that's really important. So now at the Latino Donor Collaborative, we're doing all these studies, labor productivity, GDP, all of that, and also Hollywood, in terms of the lack of portrayal of Latinos and Latinas. The great data, great charts. And so we're sharing that to say, when you have all this data that says this group over here, this table is going to be the fastest growing, they're going to create more value, they're going to do all of that. And over here, you're putting the money over here in the spotlight. You earned the title that I have somebody here that can attest to. You earned the title that I talk about publicly at these events You're either a pendejo or a pendeja. Right? And then I say for those of you that are, bilingually challenged, and then other people start yelling at what they mean. But anyways, I am really convinced, and I have the data to prove it, that if this country, in all the cities, states, companies, understood the data, we would see dramatically different focus on investing, where U.S. Latinos are creating 80% of all net new businesses, 50% of all employer-based businesses, and yet I had a study done 2 years ago by Bain Consulting, and less than 1% of all invested capital by the top 25 private equity firms and VC firms is going into the Latino cohort. Would you rank them as the smartest people in the world, right? And I mean over time, because this is going to play out, and those who get it are going to be those who are benefiting. And so, Ernie, my apologies for being so long. I'm highly motivated because I'm an American. This is my country. This is my community. And I want to help everybody be much more successful than the path that they're on today.
It's wonderful. Anyway, I thought maybe I'd let some of these folks introduce themselves a bit. And so I'm going to start with you, Angela, because I think you're kind of so these are all board members here. And Angela, I think you might have been the first female engineer for
First director of engineering for Mexico Gas.
Engineer for Mexico Gas. It's all about it. Yeah. Travel. So kind of talk a little bit about your career and how that came.
Sure. So I started in Farmington, oil and gas girl. Grew up working for ConocoPhillips in this environment where there was nothing but men and me. So I went to school, and at the time I had a TO that told me, "Mijita, why do you want to become an engineer? Women aren't engineers. No, you would be such a cute nurse. You become a nurse." He told me this, and I told my parents, "Well, why can't I become an engineer? TO says that I should become a nurse." So I thought about that, and I could be an engineer just because women typically aren't engineers. I can do it. So I went to state, finished at the University of British Columbia, and there were times where it was challenging. Engineering was very challenging. But then I thought, my TO told me that I couldn't do it, that I wasn't going to be an engineer. So I proved him wrong. I did it. I became an engineer, and I became the first director of engineering for New Mexico Gas. I'm also the first woman in New Mexico to be building a hydrogen pipeline, which is really cool for the state, something that's new and innovative that is new not only for New Mexico, but for the U.S. as a whole.
And the world.
And the world, correct. So I've done some really cool things. I could go on for a long time talking about some cool things I've done. But I'm really excited that you're here today with us. And this morning I was thinking, I have the opportunity to ask this guy a question. Not many of us are going to get the opportunity. So I do have a question. So I would love to ask you, and I have several here. So let me get to it here. So many young professionals see New Mexico as a stepping stone. Inexpensive college, training, great weather, low cost of living. But they graduate, leave the state, and never come back. Or more importantly, they never get back. What do you tell young Hispanic professionals about always supporting your roots and the community that they built?
Wow, that's a great question. I spent part of our lunch talking about why not New Mexico, because I spent 8 years here in my life, but I didn't grow up here. But this is the land of enchantment, right? But I think the big thing here is young people, as I've dealt with them all around the world, they deal with their future. And they want their life to be part of an exciting future life, right? They have aspirations. And so, for me, in the case of the state of New Mexico, I've been frustrated, sort of, because I don't live here. I'm not here to criticize, but I think that there's a missing vision for the future of a Latina that can become the head of engineering. She can be an engineer. She can come out of a Sandia Labs or a Los Alamos Labs or the University, New Mexico State or UNF, and get a career in a company that's going to be game changing. So when you talk about hydrogen, a hydrogen pipeline, we're learning a lot about electric vehicles. We're learning a lot about, some of the problems that people didn't foresee. But there are new solutions that could be centered here, given what you said, about hydrogen, about other things that companies here can do. And then there's people that have started their own companies here, and they can grow their businesses, and they can innovate here and stay here and work with the universities, work with all this educational systems to create that vision that says, look, you do want to stay here. You do want to work here. You want to create a company here, but you gotta go work in a bigger company that's going to allow you to thrive, and you're going to have resources and infrastructure around you. And I tell this story quite often about a friend of mine that we're not friends like we spent time together, but his name is Dr. Eduardo Patron, who ran Miami-Dade College for 25, 30 years. And I came across him somewhere along the way. And I'm always intrigued, I'm always looking, I'm always reading for people that are making differences, where people claim that they're making a difference. I read about it because I want to understand. And Miami-Dade College was like most community colleges, graduating people, certain degrees. But what he did was he reimagined what the future of Latino kids, because 90+% of the kids that go to Miami-Dade College are Latinos. And he reimagined what they could be doing. So now in this digital era that we now live in, he was talking to Google, to Facebook, to Amazon, to Tesla, and creating what I would call pods of learning, so that these people can get their degrees in 2 years and go out and work the minute that they're graduated and start earning $80,000 to $120,000 a year, first job out of the chute, with background and with the opportunity in those companies, because they're grounded in what that company is about. And in the digital era, there's so many variations of what does a digital company look like. And as you're finding out, there's a lot there. So my punchline here is people have to reimagine what this state is, what the city is, what the company is, and create a vision that people say, I want to be part of it, versus I'm going to go into a rope job, it's going to be the same for the next 30 years. No, I don't want to do that. Because today, the bottom half of millennials, the Gen Zs, and the Alpha generation, they don't think about careers in a company. They think about the various jobs or things that they want to do in their life. So it's people like me and other people that are baby boomers or even Gen Xers have to start understanding markets have changed. And the last comment I'll make is, one of my thematics whenever I talk is that we live in 21st century America, not 20th century. So in the financial world, we got to rethink architecture and investing and all that sort of thing. In the technology world, it's obvious. In other sectors, retail has changed dramatically. So reimagine, rethink, explain, and then go execute around it.
Great. Let me, I was remiss that I didn't thank Board Member Steve Chavez for buying our lunch today. Thank you very much, Steve. I think I said that. So, Joe, you're only non-Hispanic serving chair of the Hispano Chamber. And we always kind of say, you know, we want to be included as Hispanics, but we also need to be inclusive as Hispanics. And I also say you grew up in South Valley, so he's probably Hispanic. So why did you want to be so involved in this art chamber, culture, and everything like that? So,
Yeah, thank you, and hello everyone. Not sure if I'm on or not.
I think you got to hit this through the button.
Oh, right, it shows it's green.
All
All right, man, I'm thinking my voice carries anyway, so I should be okay. Get in the back, yeah, perfect. So, thank you for that, Ernie. And I think for me, when I'm based on the question you asked, I am not a Hispanic or Latino, but I am a believer that people who look like me can be allies for the communities that they live in. And I may not be Hispanic, Mexican, Latino, but I am a New Mexican. And that to me is what is critically important in how I am who I am as a person. I did grow up here, born and raised in Albuquerque. To Ernie's point, I grew up in the South Valley and in the West Side here in town. And when I was very young, I had some very good leaders that made significant impressions on who I am as a person. I came from a single family household. Dad wasn't in the picture. Mom was a teacher and barely able to pull together the pennies we needed to continue to survive. And because of that, it really did instill morals that I wasn't aware of initially until I got older and was provided the opportunity through the career I started here at Wells Fargo to start to give back into the community. And when I was able to do this, I started to look and really ask myself, what are the organizations that are making a difference? And there were a couple things that stood out to me about the chamber that really created this mindset that why am I not involved and I should be involved? And the first is that we're centered around small businesses. I grew up in a family of small business owners. I just learned at a very early age that it wasn't for me per se, because I saw family members make sacrifices, miss a child's birthday because an employee called out, pick up a Saturday because inventory was critical and needed to get done. And those to me are moments that made their business, but what I knew I was passionate about, not necessarily being the business owner, because I do like working for a boss, is finding a place that encourages that give back. And that's the opportunity here at Wells Fargo. But the second component, the small business focus being the first one, the second is that I felt like our mission was aligned. This chamber believes that this community is great. I do as well. And I believe that the work we do is significant work because there are people out there, and I've told Ernie this before, it just still continues to baffle me that not every business owner in Albuquerque connects with this organization. Because I feel like the core values of what we do truly represent how and where we all want to be, not individually. And I love what you said, Sol, about some of the goal setting, but I think there's some goals that we can do together to help move things forward. So it really means a lot to me, and I've shared this with Ernie. This was probably one of the most prideful years I've ever had. I worked my tail off. For a lot of you, know or remember Jennifer Reardon. I'm going to get choked up because every time I break her name up. Yeah. But it's because I know she's looking down at those words that she uttered to me from the start. I have the responsibility to share what I know and to continue to learn from those in my community. And that's why it really means a lot to me to be where I'm at and sitting here in front of all of you with these great leaders on the stage. So, thanks.
I'm going to steal a question, maybe.
Please, yeah.
Real quick. So it was really interesting because if you go to Latitude, and I really encourage you all to do that, he and Gary Costa, they do these fireside chats like But he had a gentleman who's the president of Sony on there. And, you know, and Sol, as you can tell, he's very eloquent. But he really was trying to get the point across that it's data, it's smart business sense to be paying attention to this community. And I remember so he kind of got a little bit frustrated. He kind of said, Sol, you're waving the data in front of me and want me to make a change instantly. And you're going like, I've been telling him this for years. So, I mean, I think, Sol, how does it go after these discussions you have like with that Sony president and all that? Because they are pretty good. They're very interesting to be.
Yeah, you know, at Latitude, I invite in some of the top CEOs of some of the top brands in the world, because they're all dependent upon the Latino cohort for growth. And so I like to talk to them about how are they taking advantage of it? How are they growing with it? Give me some examples and data and all that. But I always prepare. The one thing I always learned in my career when I was a young punk kid with hair this big and all that kind of stuff was that I never went into a meeting not being more prepared than anybody else in the room. So when I have these CEOs, I go on YouTube, I look at their commercials, I look at a lot of things. I do research, I Google them, I do a lot of things, and I gather data. So they can't feed me a line as the Sony president. He wasn't trying to feed me a line, he was trying to say it's harder to do than you think it is. And so my approach is always to say, okay, I know how hard it is. I've run bigger companies than yours, right? So, and I've had to go into foreign countries where dealing with communist governments, dictators, whatever. So I know what hard to do is, but you never can get hard to do done if you don't get started and you don't have a plan to do what you say is hard to do. And so I like to push them. And we have conversations afterwards. We have conversations before. Because I'm not in the business of telling the CEO what to do. Because I know if anybody came in to see me and said, so here's what you should be doing in your job, I'd say, thank you very much. Goodbye. Right? And not to say you don't listen, because you're always left right. But I've always felt, and this is very sincere, I loved hearing from people that didn't come in saying, this is how you should do your job, versus, have you thought about this? Have you looked at that? And all those kinds of things. And I'm always sitting there saying, holy, whatever, fill in the blank. Why didn't I think of that? Or, I really haven't, and I should, right? And so the mind is so expansive if you let it work. And so with him, I know, because now he's doing 2 movies and he's doing another TV show produced that they don't call Sony, it's for, a production studio. And he's very sincere. He's hired some people now in his more senior management. So he listens. But the one I like to talk about, because it was very public, was the Nike CEO. The Nike CEO, Nike is in the top 3 most admired brands in the world. And it's massive, right? They have presence. You can go to remote China, and you can go to remote Africa, remote everywhere, and you'll see the Nike brand. And John Donahoe is the CEO there. He's a very thoughtful leader. But in my opinion, and I told him this, so I'm going to say it publicly here, because I told it to him in public, I think you've got some real blind spots. Really? Tell me. And I said, well, if you look at Nike, how would most consumers define Nike? Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Serena Williams, right? And you can go on. And we went through an era where everybody in the world knew who Michael Jordan was. And I was literally on a trip in Europe, going through a part of Spain, stopped at a little gas station to put gas in the car, and there was a little TV, and it was Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls playing somebody, Portland or somebody. And I asked the gas station attendant, because I was shocked. I mean, it was in a remote part of Spain. And I said, so who are you watching? And I was talking to him in Spanish. I said, who are you watching? And he said, oh, the basketball de los Estados Unidos. ¿Eres de los Estados Unidos? And I said, yes. And so he said, ese Michael Jordan. Ese Michael Jordan. Everybody said it was such a phrase. So back to Nike, they built the company around a single personality. And Michael Jordan became a cultural icon around the world. Now, Kobe Bryant was almost as close, Serena Williams, not even close, but big in the US. But if you go to other parts of the world, you know, most of the people they know who she is, but not identifiable. And then you can go through LeBron James, who's not near where Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant was, even though he's a phenomenal athlete. So then I said, John, what is the most played sport in America today? And we all know now, in our context, we call it soccer, and other parts of the world they call it football. Right? And there's more kids playing soccer today than basketball or football or baseball or whatever. And I said, so how do you think about growth? So, well, I like to focus on, whatever. And so then I said, so this is a sport that is now dominated by Latinos and their kids. And don't you sell shoes, or don't you want to sell shoes? Oh, by the way, they're the most populous, fastest growing cohort of youth. And he's sitting there and he said, Sol. And we knew each other, so he knew me that I'm like a dog with a bone. I don't let go of it. So he said, Sol, I get the thematic, I get what you're telling me. So what do you think I should be doing? So now he's inviting me to tell him what he should be doing as a job. Now this was in private. That part was in private. So I told him what I thought I would do if I were in his job. And so he came on stage this year at Latitude. And he called me a week before and he said, Sol, would you mind if I made an announcement about a new board member I'm putting on the board of Nike? And because I had helped him get the person, think of the person. And he told me, and I said, great. He said, we just made the board decision. Phil Knight, who's the founder of Nike, he was excited, etc. But I can tell you that in the process that they were going through, everybody was saying, who is she? Right? Because she wasn't the famous Angla that most, or African American, that they like putting in boards. So I said, sure, whatever you're comfortable with, because you're the guy who lives with and living this kind of conversation. So he came out and said, no, I need to tell people, because this Latitude event and my conversation with you on stage, where you ask me certain questions, I'm accountable. So that's the leader of Nike, a really terrific leader, because he was showing he's not perfect. He was showing that he listens. He was showing that he can learn. And we all can learn everything. Long story short, for all of you that weren't there, he announced that he was appointing a woman by the name of Monica Gui, a Latina, on their board. And that's it. Let me tell you, reverberations around the corporate world of all these major brands, major companies that don't have Latinas on their boards. And I've been on a mission for the last 3-4 years about Latinas specifically, because they're the most under-engaged cohort amongst all cohorts. And so to give you some data, they're 1/18th in terms of presence relative to population size versus the African American woman. And then dramatically, obviously, behind Anglo kind of woman. And so at the same time, the Latina, and if they have a home and a household, Latinas make 86% of all household purchase decisions. The Anglo mother makes 70% of all household purchase decisions. And the African American woman makes about 78%. So I'm a data guy, so I get this data because that's how you go compete and win. So John, he was there, he gave credit to the conversations at Latitude that I forced him in public to say, I learned, I heard, I came, and now I'm sharing with all of you what we're doing. And it was great because the people in the audience were sitting there saying, yeah, there is a purpose. There are leaders that will listen. But you have to be firm in talking about what you think is important. And I think that's what you observe is no important. I mean, I don't care if people like it or not. I am respectful. I will always, respect the job, the person, whatever. But I'm going to ask the tough questions and force them to respond and think about it. And to me, that's the essence of how you make change. If you're a leader of a company, right? Some of you are here thinking about times where you've been challenged by others, right? Or you've got a great idea, but everybody thinks it might not be so great. That's when it's up to you to say, no, I'm firm in my conviction. Or my convictions need to be modified with a wider angle lens on whatever it might be.
So Phil, you're one of the guys that kind of left, you're a Valley Hunter guy and UNM guy and moved somewhere else and somehow we reeled you back in. So what made you come back to Mexico? And you have, I don't know, I'm amazed that every time I say, hey, I went to this building, it's a really cool building because I built it. At CNM, somebody was talking about the new Lotaburgers. He goes, we built those. And Teslas and stuff I didn't tell. So you probably could have stayed other places, probably in Texas or whatever. What brought you back?
Well, clearly family. And I think just kind of going back up to a little bit of what Sol was saying earlier, when you look to see just how far back your family goes here in Mexico, very similar way back into the 1500s and those that kind of settled in the southern New Mexico area as well as northern New Mexico. But grew up in the 70s here, was educated in the 80s and moved away in the 90s. And this is kind of where you start the career process, right? At that time, there really wasn't in the fields of business that I was going into as well as my wife. The job market really wasn't that great here. Our original intent was not to move away. Because we're from here, this is where we grew up, but the intent was not. So we felt in some ways drawn to or forced in some ways when it comes to actually trying to develop your career to move away into the larger market. But it didn't take too long after about 9-10 years to realize there's a little bit more to life than just the career part and the money part. You do have to be as close as you can to those people that surrounded you when you were growing up, those people that you have a close network with and that can help you as you're raising a family and building your career as well. So the family drew us back. But the industry that I'm involved in, which is construction in the industrial and commercial markets, we see regionally, right? We're based out of here. We have about almost 1,100 employees, about 800 tradesmen. So you can imagine just kind of the balance of people that we have that goes through the company, of which 58% of them are Hispanic. And that covers Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and parts of California. We're licensed in the United States. So your report, that data, Ernie always teases me that I'm a data guy, but I also like summary reports too, just. I felt that more as a validation to say all the things that we've been thinking about and doing internally with our company are valid. Support based on the data, because of the data, because that data to us is very new, but saying, look, close to 60% of our workforce currently are Hispanics. And as we're approaching every part of our business, that's to how we're marketing ourselves, to how we're onboarding employees, to communicating with our employees, everything from execution to safety to everything that we're doing. You have to take it to that approach with the understanding that communication is key, especially in our business. And so if we're taking the approach, let's say, of communicating in a certain way, when you come to find out 60% of your workforce may not be their first language, right? Everything that we're putting out, whether it's internal or external, we're putting out Spanish translations for every single part of that. Understanding that this is the workforce, and now with the data that we're seeing, that is even going to be a bigger workforce for us. And we're an open shop contractor. If you're good and skilled in what you do, we want to hire you. But we also understand that it supports growth in the Hispanic communities. And interestingly, the report didn't show that New Mexico was one of the top states that was, that has that Latino influence in growth. We see it, right? And I think that's probably purely based on the total number in the workforce, but it's there. It's there in the areas that we do focus in. It's something that for instance, I'm a president CEO of the company. I have to look at things a little differently than the other members of our management team, because I have to look out into the future and to see, hey, are we in the right markets? Are we providing the right service? Do we have the right people? Internally, are we developing those people? And even the development process of our workforce, because we know that the workforce is not there to just grab off the shelf. You have to develop them internally. Those programs are designed in and around the knowledge that our employees and future workforce come from the Hispanic community.
I think at this point in time, there might be some questions out there from some of you all. If you'd like to ask a question of Sol or anybody else here. Anybody want that opportunity? Going.
No one?
Oh, we got a couple here.
Yeah, hi. My name is Cameron. Dick, actually, born and raised here. Started a local merchant processing company. How did you draw other attention outside of the state to see what you're working on as a audience? Like, how did you draw other people to see what your goal and your vision was? I guess. What was how do you get that vision out? How do you speak that in the mission statement? I guess. How was that your culture and all that kind of stuff? How would you do that? If you don't mind me asking, each one of you guys are in those.
I concur with that. I think that I don't really think that it matters where you're at, where your hometown is at, what state you're from, or city or industry. I think employees want to know, who are you as a company? We present ourselves, Bricon, construction company, but they want to know, who are we really, right? What are our values? What actually is your culture? Separate from what you tell people. And as soon as they realize that, as soon as they understand our culture, I think that actually brings it's a sales job in the sense that, hey, you're delivering what you promised, right? And so that's how you just draw people in to see, what are you doing? We happen to be very fortunate because we have to work on very large projects, exciting projects that are happening in the United States. Some of the bigger projects we're a part of, and that's a fun story to tell people. So it intrigues them, it catches their interest, and a lot of people want to be a part of something that's really, really exciting.
You know, in my case, I worked in a big company. When I started my career in the largest company in the world called AT&T, the Bell system. And I was a maverick. So I always challenged kind of the state of where things were. And so after about 2 years working in Wyoming and then corporate headquarters in Denver, Colorado, they sent me down to New Mexico because New Mexico was the worst performing state in the whole Bell system. Okay, lowest rate of returns, all kinds of issues. And it was run by somebody named Caloran and somebody named Dunlap and somebody named Smith and all that. And it was always intriguing to me that I didn't see a Garcia or Martinez or whatever in a state like New Mexico, right? And that's not a bias, it's just like, okay, do you understand customers? Anyways, they sent me down from corporate because I was pointing out all kinds of things, and they said, well, so if you think you know so much, well, we're going to send you down there. Why don't you go fix it? Okay. And I had never thought about coming to New Mexico, so I came, and within 2 years, we took it from the bottom performing part of the old Bell system to the top performing. 2 years. And as I came down, I looked at the talent that I had, and I picked a woman by the name of Irene Chavirra, who as my CFO. And she was buried in the finance organization. And she was talented, and I was new, so I had no preconceptions about people. I put her in charge of my finance. I had an operating person by the name of Joe Montano that I elevated because he knew operations, he used to be an installer, repairer, all that kind of stuff, and put him in a key role. Then our external communications were so bad. Regulators hated us. The state legislature hated us. We were the whipping boys and girls. And I asked a guy by the name of Bill Garcia, who later became the Commerce Secretary under, I think, one of the King administrations. And then John Aragon to be my head of PR. And so we started putting together people that I thought were the most talented. And when people would ask me in corporate, what happened? 2 years, turnaround from number 50 to number 1? ¿Qué pasó? And I would say, it's the talent of the team that I put together. I mean, I was kind of forceful, but they were very good at what they did. And then when I was leaving, some people used to come up to me and they said, Sol, did you ever understand that when you were here, the team that you put together was called the Mexican Mafia? And I said, no, because nobody ever said that to my face. But, there were Latinos and Latinas on the team, along with some Anglos, that were part of the team. And I don't think anybody felt excluded or not part of the team, because I'm a believer that you build teams, and teams should look like your customers, should look like, your suppliers, they should look like, in some cases, investors that you have. And if you make them all play by the same rules, there's no preference because your name's Garcia or Smith. People accept that and they like it, and then they make more money because you're performing well, and they get bonuses and they get other things, stock options, and all that. And that's been my philosophy, whether I was in China, building out a whole wireless operation there, or in Africa or the Middle East. And I think people just like that. They like to be inclusive. They like to know the rules. And here's the example I give so that I can bring it to life in a sports context. There's a sport that you have a ball in your hand, right? And if you like playing sports, if you're American, you say, okay, let's go play some baseball. But if you're over in Asia Pac, people would say, okay, let's go play cricket. Because they play with a ball and a bat. And my learning as a leader has always been that I knew growing up in my career, I wanted to know what the rules were. So that I knew what game to play. And as long as I understood the rules, what game it was that we were going to play, I knew I could win. And that clarity for people to know that if my name is Smith and the boss is named Trujillo, am I going to be disadvantaged versus somebody named Garcia? And the answer is no. It's going to be what you do on the field. But it's going to be that everybody has a chance to play on the field. And then whoever performs best are the people that get to rise and succeed and get bonuses and promotions and whatever else. And so, your question is really important because it's creating a culture. And the culture is about performance. But the culture is also about everybody can play and have a chance at performing. Because if only the same people get the chance at performing, you never get the full potential. And the last part of it was, I always used to tell people in my corporate headquarters, whenever they want to know, how did you get this and that, how did all that happen? And I was a believer that I want every employee in my business to feel that they could achieve whatever they wanted to achieve. That because they were a woman, they couldn't be the head of all the installers or repair people. And when I became the CEO of US West, I made a woman the head of, 20,000 people who were installing and repairing. And you should have seen the reaction from the union. So it's all about the culture. It's about performance. And it's about sameness, that everybody plays by the same rules, at least in my view.
So we'll take this last question, and then we'll have an opportunity afterwards to maybe one-on-one with Sol or something like that.
So thanks so much for your insight. So because of your global view and your experience, and with your understanding of Latino GDP and what you've done within those cohorts, where do you see that the fastest growing opportunities are, fastest growing industries are in the next 5 to 10 years for the Latino community?
It will mirror where the economy is. So for example, healthcare, because of the aging population that we have, if any of you are watching linear TV today, every night it's filled with pharma kinds of commercials. If you've got this or you've got that, and I sit there at night and I tell Corey, my wife, I say, I've never even heard of that. There's so much money to be made and such a strong need of reducing the cost of healthcare that pharma does play one role. But it's really centered on this aging of the population, because the baby boomers are now almost all 65 or older. And the Gen Xers are now standing in line behind them. And so healthcare is a big sector where we as a nation have to worry about the cost of delivery, because the base is just going to get bigger and bigger. So then the second part of it is the technology side. And the technology side is, now we're starting to learn a little bit about AI. So we're past the cloud, right? We've learned about the cloud. Almost every business has cloudified their business in one way or another. We're also finding out the risks of cloudifying and the security issues, right? All the things that go with it in terms of breaching and whatever else. But we're past the cloud stage, and now we're going into this virtual reality kind of era. And you have a guy like Mark Zuckerberg that's out there talking about the metaverse. And I would say there's some of us that have been talking about our version of the metaverse 10, 15 years ago, where when I went to Australia, well, I I tore my Achilles playing tennis, and I was a brand new CEO there. There were like 400 CEOs that wanted to meet me. We were having a big meeting in New Zealand, and I couldn't travel because the doctor said, you get on a plane, you're gonna get blood clots, and you'll probably die or something, right? And so I told my technology team, how do we make me virtually appear? And they looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, we have technology of fiber, which means bandwidth, and we know how to deliver images because that's how networks and others were starting, to deal on a fiber platform. And so I said, so why can't I go there? And probably what we need are cameras that are capable of doing kind of multi-dimensional imaging. And they're looking at me and they said, you're not an engineer, so you don't understand this. And I said, that's true, I'm not an engineer. But I can envision what can be, right? So long story short, I called up Cisco, the company, I did the CEO. I said, John, you gotta help me solve this problem because I have to be there. It's my launch as the new CEO of this company. And by the way, just to divert for a second, when I was announced as the new CEO, there was a big story because this is the biggest company in all of Asia Pac. And they had the front page cover that said New Telstra Chief. And it had a caricature of Mexicano on a burro con un cerrado y sombrero así. That was my welcome into Australia. So all these, and I was in there making change. I mean, dramatic. Taking on the government, privatizing the company, all that kind of stuff. Regulators, suppliers, everybody, unions. So I was an in the news kind of guy. I was the second most covered person in Australia for 4 years. Second only to the Prime Minister. So that shows you how reporters used to wait where I lived, outside there, take photos of me, follow me everywhere, all that kind of stuff. But my point is that when this event was going to occur, I wanted to show them what a Mexicano was like, right? And so we figured it out. We figured out how to do a form of what I would call virtual appearance, holographically, in terms of, this is 2005, okay? So I couldn't make it, so my head of sales was there with all these CEOs in the audience that wanted to learn about this guy that was controversial, all that kind of stuff, and what he was going to do with this company. And so my head of sales, David Toby, he's standing there at the podium, starting to say, welcome to everybody, we really appreciate it, your valued customers from around the region, etc. And he said, but I'm here to apologize because my boss, CEO Sol Trujillo, can't make it, and he tore his Achilles, he's not allowed to travel. And so he was, carrying it out a little bit long. And so the way we did it, we had the camera set up so that I literally appeared behind him. So he theoretically wouldn't have known I was behind him. And I touched him on the shoulder, and I said, David, and he acted surprised. And so the place went nuts because I appeared even though I couldn't get there. I was there in a holographic form. And that was the first example of a delivery of a virtual, kind of the virtual reality that people were starting to talk about. And so when I look back to your question about what's next, it is the virtualization of almost everything, because we can solve a lot of healthcare issues, we can solve a lot of problem solving algorithmically and testing and other things that can happen. But also we need to understand that it's already happening in games, in the gaming world. I'm not a gamer, but I've invested in a company that's going to be hopefully the de facto standard for ad insertions and all that on these game platforms. Because the environment of how young people thinking about doing things in microseconds, right? Not seconds, but microseconds. We have to rethink a lot of the algorithms and structures. And so I'm thinking a lot about it now personally, as an investor, but also in terms of ways that can help solve a lot of problems that we have in our society and in the world. But the key, back to your question, is if I'm a young person right now or going to college or even in high school, I'm thinking about that. How do I develop some of the core knowledge base? And most kids do because of the technology that's now available. But get into those worlds, understand those worlds, because you're living them. For me, I didn't grow up in. I mean, I remember Pong and Tetris, stuff like that. You know, that it's, so when I go into those dimensions, I don't relate well, but I can conceptually relate well. So instinctively, it's not for me. But for the 8-year-old, 12-year-old, 22-year-old, the average age of the gaming female is 38. The average age of the gaming male is 32. So we have perceptions that, well, gaming is all about guys. No, it's about women. And they're even more intense, more prolific as users of the game sphere. So, you know, your question is really an important question that we should always think about. There's going to be the second half of the 21st century that's going to look differently than the first half, which now the first half looks dramatically different than what I call 20th century America, but it's essentially the world. So we're going to have currencies that are digital. We're going to have environments where you can appear, you can visit, you can travel, you can work, you can solve problems, you know, medically, all of that. That's we're in the nascent stage. You know, we're like in the first inning of that 9-inning game, because the cloud is now SA, right? And the cloudification and how you can manage data and do big data and all this other stuff. But this next wave is coming, and guess who the youth cohort of America is? The Latinos, the Latinas. And they're living in that sphere now. And so I would say, you know, as you think about what's next, right? It's like the manager of a baseball team. When you think about your pitcher that's pitched for 3 or 4 innings, who's up next? And who are the batters that are going to be there, you know, in that sequence? And so we all need to think that way. We need to put ourselves into that realm. I don't care what business you're in. Think about what's next, because that's where the bigger opportunities are for margins, et cetera. Doesn't mean where you're at can't be profitable and can't grow. It just means there's always that evolution.
All right, well, how about a round of applause for our